outrage this morning after a pro-Antifa high school teacher is caught on camera bragging about his push to turn students to the far left.
Like I have an Antifa flag on my wall, and a student complained about that, and he said it made him feel uncomfortable. And I addressed it to everyone because I didn't know who he was, and I was like, well, this is meant to make fascists feel uncomfortable. So if you feel uncomfortable, I don't really know what to tell you. Like maybe you shouldn't be aligning with the values that this is antithetical to.
Okay, there's a lot to say about this, but let's start off with the fact that anti-fascism is not by itself far left. Anti-fascism should be the default. In fact, anti-fascism was taught when I was in school, and it was very uncontroversial. We read things like the Diary of Anne Frank, and learned about the horrific atrocities committed by fascists around the world. The fact that these right-wingers are trying to paint anti-fascism as though it's something radical is absolutely unbelievable and perfectly telling to exactly what they are. Because let's be clear about what actually is being taught in our schools today. What is being taught are things like this.
Right-wing Christian textbooks are teaching that enslaved black people were actually immigrants. That's what they're teaching, among other things. I kid you not. These textbooks used in thousands, you heard me correctly, thousands of private schools, many of which receive tens of thousands of dollars in public funding every year, whitewash the legacy of slavery, frame Native Americans as lesser, and blame the Black Lives Matter movement for sowing racial discord.
When it comes to the United States history of committing atrocities against people of color, against indigenous people, against black people, when it comes to our history of slavery and genocide, all of that gets completely whitewashed.
About half of states in this country have either enacted or are looking to enact restrictions on discussions of systemic racism.
When children learn in schools about the phrase manifest destiny, they learn it as a good thing, where the United States was just bound to expand, and maybe they get a footnote about indigenous people being murdered across the country. But the true nature of the phrase, the fact that it was used as a banner under which the United States actively committed genocide against indigenous people, is completely erased from the narrative. When it comes to the history of slavery, they don't talk about the gruesome reality that people were subjected to under that system. They don't talk about the sheer brutality and violence committed against black people in the United States. They even whitewash it up to the point where when it comes to the Civil War, which was very much about slavery, they try and paint it as though it's for something like states' rights, which is complete utter nonsense. Very few people are taught about the reality of sundown towns in the United States and how they reached their peak in the 70s and 80s. That's far more recent than most of those people are willing to admit. People aren't taught about how the government killed people like Fred Hampton. They're not taught about the Black Panthers breakfast programs. These are not things that are taught in school, despite the fact that when children have breakfast programs in these schools, the very origin is hidden from them. Literally just a year ago, at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, when indigenous folks asked for PPE for the coronavirus pandemic, the Trump administration sent them body bags instead. And these right-wingers have the audacity to say that we shouldn't talk about systemic racism in our schools? And this is the reality that America needs to contend with, that it's never really contended with. That the United States was founded on slavery. That it was founded on the genocide of indigenous people. That's the reality we are dealing with today. But if you don't teach children honestly about the horrors of slavery, if you don't teach children the fact that sundown towns were so popular in the 70s and 80s, then how do you expect them to have any type of understanding about racism in the United States today? This is Ben Carollo with Rebel Headquarters. You can catch my show Galaxy Brain on the Young Turks Twitch channel every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. You can also follow me on Twitter if you want to stay up to date with my content.